Welcome back to CEEN Caribbean News. It's now time for In-Depth. Two senators were forcibly removed from their posts following the bitter leadership race of the opposition Jamaica Labour Party in 2013. They were Arthur Williams and Dr. Christopher Tufton. Ironically, the letters used by opposition leader Andrew Holness to evict the two senators were drafted by Senator Williams, who is himself a lawyer by profession. But the letters in question were only to be used should opposition senators vote contrary to the party's position on the Caribbean Court of Justice. Williams fought back by suing the JLP leader, and last week the courts ruled in his favor, noting that his removal was unconstitutional. Two senators, Royal Reid and Nigel Clark, were installed to replace the ousted senators, but Mr. Williams has now announced that he intends to be reinstated. We have been joined by two political analysts, Kevin O'Brien Chang and Richard Crawford, to discuss the situation. Welcome to In-Depth, Mr. O'Brien Chang and Crawford.
Hi, everybody. Afternoon, everyone. Hi.
Now, Mr. O'Brien Chang, we begin with you. What implications will this ruling have on the Senate?
Come again?
What implications will this ruling have on the Senate?
Well, right now the lawyers are deciding. If you're listening in Jamaica here, the lawyers are quite divided. Some say the status quo, the ruling would suggest the status quo will remain. Others are saying Mr. Reid and Mr. Clark should resign and put back Mr. Tufton and Williams, assuming that they want a position. They haven't said that they want to be put back as senators. So it's really right now in the hands of the lawyers, that particular question. The legal minds are trying to figure out what is the proper constitutional ruling on that part of it. We know the letters were unconstitutional, but the current senators were not sure if they're legitimate or not.
Now, Mr. Crawford, is it a standard practice for party leaders to ask their Senate candidates to pre-sign resignation letters?
That's a very good question. The incidents of that nature that we know of have been preceded in not senators, but it has been a strategy that has been used in the Labour Party before. And perhaps that is what drove Mr. Holness or gave him the idea to use that strategy in this particular case, which has really not worked. Sir Alexander Bustamante was known to use or to have predated resignation letters in his files from his party. And if you disagree with him, then he could use that letter to dismiss you. Now, that did not, of course, happen in the Parliament, in the Senate, nor in the lower house. But it's been a culture and a practice in Jamaica, because in Jamaica, what happens to us is that maybe sadly, or I think, the party takes precedence over everything else, and the power of the leader and the position of the leader is the most important issue. Our Constitution does that. It gives all power to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister in Jamaica is automatically the leader of the party. The Prime Minister, the Minister of Defense, is the most important person. So consequently, anybody who tends to disagree with that important person finds themselves into varying problems, and has happened in our history. So I think that Andrew Holness used this situation, he says, ostensibly to protect the JLP's position on the Caribbean Court of Justice as a final court of appeal. So you would have these predated resignation letters if anybody were straying from the JLP's position. But unfortunately for everybody, at this point in time, it seems as if when the Jamaica Labour Party had to have an election over Andrew's position, some of those, Williams and Tufton, for example, who opposed Mr. Holness's re-election, the letters were used to dismiss them from the Senate.
Now, Mr. O'Brien Chang, what are your thoughts on Mr. Holness's actions?
Well, let us be clear about one thing. The Senate in Jamaica is appointed solely by the 13 by the government, 8 by the opposition. It's different in places like Trinidad. Trinidad now has senators appointed by the government opposition and the president, for independent senators. So they recognize that. And the only criteria to being a senator, is that the leader of the party, the JLP or the PNP, has confidence in you, that this person is on my team, I made him a senator. There's no qualification. So the logic would say that if you don't want to be on that man's team anymore, or that person's team, should they have to keep you? Because that is the only criteria for putting it in the first place. And so many feel that the letter is a clumsy way of dismissing people who have left your team. But there should be a way of dismissing them. I go back to Trinidad. Trinidad, as I say, they have independent senators. And also, at any time, the person that appoints them can fire them. And that's logical, because which job in the world can somebody you hire somebody and then you can't fire them? It really makes no sense at all. So the situation, I think there should be some amendment to the Constitution as it is. I mean, constitutions, they're not made in stone. Look at the American Constitution. It's been amended quite a few times. Nothing wrong if we amend the Jamaican one. And the current setup is not quite logical. It can't be that I hire a man to be on my team, then he leaves my team and I still have to keep him. That doesn't make any sense, really.
Which brings me to my next question, starting with Mr. Crawford. There are a lot of criticisms being directed at the opposition leader. Are the criticisms fair, especially since he was guided by his attorneys?
Boy, that's a red herring. I mean, from my viewpoint, that is just absolute stupidity. To try to tell me that Arthur Williams created and crafted the letter and advised him about that strategy, really. We're going into Grimm's fairy tales and those kinds of excuses. I think that is so weak and that's so wishy-washy. Certainly, Mr. Charles, who is the attorney for Mr. Williams, indicated that he had no intention of resigning over the dispute that they had. But, of course, the letter was predated. He had his signature on it. So to try to suggest, one, that Mr. Williams was his chief counsel and advisor, and he took the advice of Mr. Williams. If Mr. Williams had told him to jump off of Blue Mountain Peak, would he have done that? Secondly, the other problem that I'm having, too, is that Mr. Holness says that he hurried and gave back the letters to the the leader of the House before the court started its investigation into the constitutionality or not of the letters. That, again, is another very lame excuse. So I'm afraid that Mr. Holness took very bad advice and is now having to pay the price for it, and great distresses inside of the Labour Party. When you listen to the different spokespersons, the different sides speaking, the JLP is really split right into two or three. It's a problem. It's a continuing recycling of the problem inside the Labour Party, and they have got to fix it once and for all.
Now, Mr. O'Brien Chang, you mentioned that Mr. Holness was in his right to do so, given he appointed the senators in the first place. So do you think the criticisms are fair?
Well, Mr. Holness's great sin was listening to the advice of his lawyer, who happened to be Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams, in effect, has sued Mr. Holness successfully for listening to his advice. I mean, there's no question Mr. Williams was the one who drafted this. And the reality is there are other three senior lawyers in the Senate for the JLP, Kamina Johnson, Tom Tavares, Finson, Marlin Malahuford. They also signed the letter. Presumably they thought it was okay. And Mr. Holness is not a lawyer. And you had listened to your lawyer's advice, your lawyer is wrong. I don't see the great crime in that. Certainly the people calling for his resignation. I mean, Mr. Holness, the reality is he was challenged for the JLP leadership. He won, got 58% of the vote, a bigger margin than Portia Simpson Miller got when she was challenged. They've had two polls since, one by Bill Johnson, one by Don Anderson. Mr. Holness is not only the most popular politician in the JLP, he's the most popular politician in the entire country. Far more popular than anybody else, including Mrs. Portia Simpson Miller or Audley Shaw. So when people talk about he should resign, if you want to go to the people for a mandate in a general election and then you reject as your leader the people's choice, why should the people vote for you? So that talk of resignation is the sheer nonsense. It would be a political suicide for the JLP, and the JLP is a fractious party known to do stupid things, but I don't think even they would do something that stupid as to boot out the most popular politician in the country.
All right, and to wrap up our segment, what does the opposition need to do to correct this legal ill? Mr. O'Brien Chang.
Well, it's not the opposition. The league, it's for the entire country. The Constitution needs to be sorted out. What is the situation with these current senators? And as I say, I feel we should have independent senators officially. I mean, back in 93 and 97, I believe, Mr. Patterson, when the PNP won 53 seats, he actually appointed 11 PNP senators and 2 independent ones, recognizing that a PNP senator is going to vote for the PNP. So if you want us independent senators, let us do something like Trinidad, have some by the opposition, some by the government, some by the Governor General. Then we can have genuinely independent men in the Senate and allow them to be fired if they no longer suit the job. I would recommend changes for Jamaica, for our Senate, a similar situation to what prevails in Trinidad.
And Mr. Crawford.
Well, that is a sensible situation. You see, once you are appointed, although Mr. Chang is not confusing himself, but he's issued conflicting statements. Once you know you're appointed, simply because the leader loves you and appoints you, and you are a party faithful, then you are obligated to toe the party line regardless. That is the sad situation of Jamaican politics. So therefore, as he's saying, yes, there is merit and an absolute necessity, in fact, to make the Senate, the whole constitutional arrangements, and the Parliament in Jamaica to be more independent. Some people have the guts and the tenacity that they can speak independently and speak to issues, perhaps jeopardizing their political career. Look at Damian Crawford. Damian Crawford makes a statement, and they are calling for his blood, for his head. So that shows you the kind of culture about Jamaica. If you speak independently, if you're not a party lackey, a party hack, you're in problems. So consequently, that has retarded our development. And there are too many issues in our existing constitution that protects the individuals in the parliament. I mean, in truth and in fact, the only way, look at the amount of difficulty that has developed between parliamentarians downstairs in the lower house and the party leader and all kinds of problems. But the party leader, the prime minister, the president cannot get rid of them.
Time is right. Again, says Mr. Crawford. But quickly, do you think...
all over the world.
Mr. Crawford?
Yeah, but you have a farce about democracy in Jamaica.
It's not a farce.
We stop covering up.
We are a mature democracy. We're not a farce. We elect and...
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We were joined on In-Depth by political analysts Kevin O'Brien Chang and Richard Crawford to discuss the ruling of the court favor of Arthur Williams, who took JLP leader Andrew Holness to court after being ousted from the Senate in 2013 with a pre-signed, undated resignation letter. Stay tuned. Sports is next.